various different occupations and things like that. It varies by occupation. It can vary by what country you live in. Your ethnicity can vary some there too. So if you're a West Virginia coal miner, they have their own, they used to, I don't know that this is as big a deal, but they used to have their own mortality tables, and it was terrible, actually. And then if you are, for instance, if you're an actuary, you're supposed to pick a mortality table that you think represents the demographic of the group you're calculating for. So if I'm doing a hospital, an employer that's a hospital, I pick one set of mortality table. If I'm doing, say, iron workers, I may pick another. And if I'm doing, engineers at Lockheed Martin, that group would make me nervous, actually, because those guys live a long time. I would pick. Pilots live pretty long, yeah. Yeah, you got, according to that table, I think you got 70 years to go, so you should be fine. Yeah, so there's different mortality tables too for if someone says, for instance, they have some kind of heart disease issue or diabetes or things like that. They also have those mortality tables, and the reason for that is that if you want to try to buy life insurance, and they check you, they'll say, oh, your blood pressure is this, you have diabetes or whatever. Then here's your mortality table. Now they're going to price out your life insurance in a way to make sure they break even. Whereas if someone else, like in my case, they check your body mass index, blood pressure, your cholesterol levels, your blood sugar levels, all those kinds of things. They will also check the age of your parents and your siblings. That's really important to them as well, and how they died. So if you had a parent who died, but they died in an accident, that wouldn't give them any information. But if you have a parent lived to 95 and they died of a stroke or something like that, they'd be like, whoa, you live a long time. So on the life insurance side of things, they price that out, and they go, wow, okay, our risk is less.
And then they give you a map of how to get to Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Right, yeah, if you're older than 65, diabetes with high blood pressure, your life insurance premiums are pretty high, yeah.
And they give you the security tools.
Right, yeah, to get into Fort Knox in order to be able to pay for it, yeah. Yeah, there's some individuals I just say there's no sense in calling the life insurance company. They're not going to insure you. Yeah. So anyway, so I spent 10 years doing this.
For a specific life insurance company, or who did you work with?
I worked for an annuity. I worked for an actual consulting firm that worked primarily with annuities and post-retirement medical. So I also did medical analysis on groups. And again, you would have and with Medicare offset and stuff like that. So what's the premium for a 70-year-old who's working for a paper making company out of just north of Houston. Not Conway. Dresser Enders? Conroe, thank you. Conway's Arkansas. Conroe. And what's the post-retirement medical claims on those groups? And projecting them into the future and modeling them so you have 1,000 retirees and you're projecting out in the future how long they're going to live, what their premiums are going to look like, the expenses are going to look like. So I spent 10 years doing those kinds of population projections. It's really boring, but I have a better feel for what those things look like now.
You did this when you were in school studying?
I did for 10 years as an actuary. I finished my master's at SMU in math and then took actuarial exams. So I'm an enrolled actuary, federal government level, and I have several of the actuarial exams for being an FSA, fellow in the Society of Actuaries.
So you were a Mustang?
I did go to SMU for 2 years, yes. I don't know that it was a Mustang, though. I didn't go to a single football game the whole time I was there because they were on probation. But yeah, after paying football players, which nowadays is actually not only legal but encouraged. No, I just mean I didn't even go to a single sporting event. When you're in grad school, it does seem a little different than when you're. Nah, I didn't care if SMU won or lost. As long as my check didn't bounce, that's all I cared about. All right, so anyway, we've been working through the book of Revelation, which is a little bit related to all this. Here's the cool thing is that I want to be an actuary in heaven, because I feel fairly certain I will get all of the tables correct. Disability tables, health insurance tables, life insurance, life expectancy. I have a very high confidence that my actuarial calculations in heaven will be spot on. And so it's the one occupation. There's a lot of occupations that won't be there, but that's one occupation I feel fairly certain will not need any advanced mathematics. You say the probability of someone dying this year is 0. You're right. And then probability of someone getting sick is 0. And disability, 0. So yeah, you want to be an actuary in heaven. You are all qualified already for it. Without the master's in applied math and without the actuarial exams, you are already qualified to be an actuary in heaven. And so the answer is there is 0 probability of any of these bad things happening. And we're in Revelation 22, which is really into that part of the text of this very hopeful finish to all of this. After going through so much trouble, we're now in the hopeful end. Now we're going to pick up in verse 6 today. And there's a little bit of statement here about this idea of soon or quickly. And so we have a statement that says, he said to me, the he there is this angel, these words are faithful and true, and the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, sent his angel to show his bondservants the things which must soon take place. And behold, I am coming quickly. Blessed is the one who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book. Now, there are two words here that in the normal use of the English language, I realize this wasn't written in English, but in the normal use of any language, the word soon take place and quickly have certain connotations to them. Now, when you remember when you were parenting small children maybe, or when you were a small child, you probably don't remember it, but if your kid says, when are we going to the park, and you say, soon, your definition of soon and the 5-year-old's definition of soon are not the same. And this will generate a great deal of impatience. You know, you said soon. You said, we were leaving soon. And but I would note that the term soon and its definition reverses when you say we need to leave for school soon. Now suddenly the parent's definition and the child's definition are very different. Now the parent has in mind something that is minutes, not hours, and the child is thinking sometime next week is still soon before we go to school. And so it is interesting to us that our understanding of soon and quickly does have a unique perspective based on what we're looking for, right? If you're 7 and your birthday's coming soon, it feels like forever. And when your 57th birthday comes along, it's like, yeah, that happened way too soon. Like that happened. How did that happen? How did this happen, right? So, for instance, I don't understand. I wake up every day feeling like I'm at an Airbnb and then realize, no, I really do live here. And I'm reminded of the fact that I'm in a 55 and older facility, which seems weird to me, right? That hitting the 55 mark came too soon, right? Too soon. And so our perspective on soon or not. But we add in here the factor from a child's perspective or even from an adult's perspective and the perception of soon or quickly. We add into all of that discussion and then add in God to this discussion. And now we really have a challenge on our hands because on what is soon in divine calendaring and what is quickly in divine calendaring may or may not fit our normal way of thinking about these things. Now, these phrases have created the preterist worldview and even post-mill worldview. The idea is it says soon, it says quickly, and we're 2,000 years later, and you're telling me we still haven't had these experiences. Maybe it's because they've already happened, that idea. Okay, so this is how post-mill and preterist worldviews say 70 AD was what Revelation was primarily describing, and that this book was written prior to 70 AD, And when he says these things must soon take place, he writes this in 68 AD, and then 2 years later it unfolds. That's the view of post-mill and preterist. And this kind of language actually is what drives the distinction between preterist and post-mill, saying it was written before 70 AD, because if it was written before 70 AD, then the claims of the book, these things must happen quickly or soon, are verified by the fact that 70 AD and the destruction of Jerusalem did happen quickly or soon. See? So this language is a big driving force among this debate over timing of some of these things. So for post-mill, they would say some of the major trouble that's described in the book of Revelation is describing what happens to Jerusalem around 70 AD, and we're in that 1,000-year millennial reign after, the 1,000-year period after the fact. That's the claim from post-mill. I'm not saying they're wrong, I'm just saying that's the claim, all right? Preterists say, no, the whole thing has already happened, and the 1,000 years is an indefinite, never-to-end period, and all deaths after this are purely spiritual resurrections in the presence of God, and the only people who are going to get physical resurrection were at 70 AD also. Preterists are even more extreme with it. Like it's all already happened. The whole book of Revelation is almost entirely happened. And a lot of this, again, this argument comes from soon take place or come quickly. And the reason I say this is that I've heard the debates between preterists and post-mill and all-mill and dispensationalists and read books on their view of the millennium. And these arguments come up from the preterist and the post-mill people. They'll say, look, it says they will soon take place, and and behold, I am coming quickly sounds like things that are right now about to happen. And you guys who are premillennial or dispensationalists would say, no, it's soon in God's timing. And the post-mill and the preterists say, I don't have to play fast and fancy with these words, right?
According to the preterists, when would they say that the tribulations took place?
All during that 70 AD time period. That it culminates with the destruction of Masada in 73 AD. That the 7 years begins at Jerusalem and finishes, it begins at 67 AD in Jerusalem and finishes at 74 AD at Masada, where the final destruction of the zealots occur. And they would say 70 AD is the completion of that, and Jesus, halfway through that, returned in some kind of philosophical way, I guess. Maybe that's not even right. Spiritual way, sorry, better term. In some kind of spiritual way. And the resurrection of the dead for the church happened then. And then after that, there's no more bodily resurrection of the church, that people just spiritually, when they die, their spirit goes to heaven, but there's no more bodily resurrection. That's the common, modern, hyper-preterist. Those are people who take a lot of ADHD meds, I think, the hyper-preterists. I don't know. Like hyper-Calvinist. I don't know what a hyper-Calvinist is. What is that? They're on Ritalin or something? I don't know. Like, what is a hyper-Calvinist, you know? There's someone, they're real jittery. I tell you what, they mess around with the Rubik's Cube all day. That's the hyper-preterist. They have to have a fidget toy. As someone who uses a fidget toy, I can appreciate this. Again, I'm permanently 5. So this is the argument. If you're a preterist or post-mill, John needs to have written this before 70 AD.
But I mean, can they kind of tell whether he did or not?
They claim, there are claims made that John, actually preterists will say the entire New Testament had to be finished before 70 AD. That's the claim. I've read their claims on this before too. And you'll see things like this in the Gospel of John. It will say things like, the pool at Bethsaida, where Jesus does the miracle, is, and they describe it, near the gate or whatever. And they say, see, the pool's still there. And I go, right, because Titus destroying the city of Jerusalem did not destroy the pool. However, John also says this, Bethany was a couple of miles from Jerusalem, past tense. Bethany was. Right? Because Titus destroyed Bethany on his way to Jerusalem in 69 AD. Bethany was destroyed. John uses the past tense with Bethany because it got destroyed. He uses the present tense with the pool. Why? Because the pool's still there. Even though the city got destroyed and the temple got destroyed, the pool's still there. I think that's evidence that John was written after 70 AD. Bethany was, city of Jerusalem, and the pool is still there. So to me, there's evidence within the Gospel of John that it was written after 70 AD, or at least after the destruction of Bethany. And so Titus destroys Bethany on his way to destroy Jerusalem. Bethany remains completely uninhabited until about 50 years, 60 years later. Rebuilt around 120, 130 AD. They start rebuilding Bethany. It's a thriving community today. Actually, a very beautiful little community, actually. You can see the city of Jerusalem from it. It's where Jesus got on the donkey and rode into Jerusalem. And it's a beautiful community. And so people say all the time, if you talk to someone who goes to the Holy Land, they'll tell you they love Bethany. Like, it's a really pretty place. And so, yeah. All right, so for those who are preterists, they say all the books had to be finished before 70 AD. For those who are post-mill, most of them will claim that Revelation was written before 70 AD, and that John is predicting the destruction of Jerusalem, not some future event. And pre-mill will say the book of Revelation was written after 70 AD. Now, there's historical reasons to say after 70 AD, because John has banished the Isle of Patmos. And this is more likely to have happened during Domitian's reign than anyone else. Nero's not messing with John. Nero couldn't care less about John. Nero didn't care about any of that stuff. So, in terms of banishment of Christians to the Isle of Patmos, that type of activity would have been a much later type event. Domitian would be a much better, Vespasian maybe, Domitian maybe, one of those emperors would have been banishing John to the Isle of Patmos, or Roman leaders to do that. We know from history that that's a more likely scenario. That Patmos was a prison island, and it was not uncommon for people to get banished there. But the church before 70 AD at the Roman level is just not that big a deal yet. Not much. Nero persecutes the church in the city of Rome, but not globally. Is really the city of Rome. Patmos is hundreds of miles from Rome. And so it's starting to feel more like Domitian is the first emperor to persecute the church empire-wide, not just in the city of Rome. So it's a more likely scenario that Domitian is the source of persecution that broke out, that got John banished to the Isle of Patmos. That's one case. Second case, that 1st and 2nd and 3rd John are written to address the Docetism controversy of Asia Minor. And we know from Polycarp that Cerinthus is the person that was perpetuating this idea, and that John knew Cerinthus, knew him personally, saw him. Polycarp was with John one day when they saw him in the marketplace. And what Cerinthus says, he denied that Jesus had a physical body. And you read 1 John, it says, here's the spirit of Antichrist. Anyone who denies that the Son of God came in the flesh is the spirit of Antichrist. That's the language that would be addressing the Docetism that had broken out in Ephesus around 90 AD. And so I think there's a strong case that 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, the Gospel of John, which also seems to be directed at Docetism, and the book of Revelation, all were written during that Docetism of Cerinthus time period, is more likely. Now, again, we could go through, there's a whole defense here of the dating of Revelation. We've talked about a lot of those things, but that drives this. And so what you'll get from post-mill and preterists, they'll say, it says soon, and here we are. This is 2,000 years later. That doesn't seem too soon to me. What's wrong with you people, right? And I know R.C. Sproul made this argument in his book, The Second Coming According to Jesus. Or that might have been MacArthur's book. Maybe Sproul's his title. I read both of them, but I can't remember. MacArthur's The Second Coming According to Jesus, that was Sproul, wasn't it? That's Sproul. MacArthur's is, I forgot the title of his, but anyway. Yeah, and those two guys who partnered in a lot of ministry have very different worldviews on this. Sproul was a preterist. MacArthur is a pre-millennial dispensationalist. Huh? Sproul is a partial preterist, right. He's not the extreme from the Preterist Research Institute in Oklahoma. Yeah. Sproul, if you try to ask Sproul right now, I'm going to accuse you of trying to conduct seances at church. So please don't try to ask R.C. Sproul. I don't know what this involves, sir, and I'd be very nervous about it. He's been dead now for a couple of years. So if you're asking Sproul questions, I'm concerned about some other issues going on here, all right? Yeah. If Richard tells you, let's all sit in a circle, I've got some candles to light, run the other way. Yeah. No seances, okay? Yeah, so this come quickly then has generated a lot of discussion. Like, well, he didn't come quickly, or these things didn't take place soon. It reminds me of this, though. 2 Peter chapter 1, all right? 2 Peter chapter 1. Know this, first of all, that in the last days mockers will come with their mocking, following after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation. See, the same accusation. The accusation is like, hey, you guys said he's coming back, Peter, and he hasn't come back. And things just keep going like it was. And these aren't the last days because, look, things still keep going, right? And so Simon Peter's dealing with the accusation even in his day. Written around 64, because he dies around 64 A.D., written right before his death, I'm assuming, 63, 64 A.D. He died 64 A.D. He is crucified in the city of Rome around 64 A.D. Paul is then beheaded about a year after 65 A.D. in Rome. And Clement of Rome, the pastor at Rome in 96 A.D., knew both of them personally. He was a young man when those executions took place. And he's now pastoring Rome in 96 A.D. He writes a letter to the Corinthian church. And he quotes Paul in it. He quotes 1 and 2 Corinthians to them and says, you guys need to be obeying Paul. He wrote this stuff to you. So Clement knew Paul and Peter and knew about their executions. He makes allusion to it in his first Clement writing. Worst labeling in church history. 1 Peter was written by Peter, the apostle. And 2 Peter was also written by Peter the apostle. First Clement was written by Clement of Rome, pastor at Rome. Second Clement was written by Clement of Alexandria. Why did they do this? Why in the world would they create this kind of confusion? It's written by two different dudes, spread by over 100 years difference, and they name one First Clement and the other Second Clement, and like, why did we do this? That's confusing. It sounds like the same guy wrote the two letters, two different people. So, First Clement, it's a letter about the length of the book of 1 Corinthians. So just give you a perspective. It has more chapters, but the chapters are shorter. He writes at 96 A.D. The reason it's important with this discussion is that his description of some of the persecution that's going on sounds a lot like what John went through on the banishment to the Isle of Patmos. This is why people say, sounds like Domitian. Sounds like Domitian. Sounds like John is experiencing Domitian's persecution as well. But Peter writes this around 64 A.D., and the argument is these people are mocking, saying, where's the promise of his coming? Because things have been going on since the fathers fell asleep. The fathers fell asleep. I assume what he means by this is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Assume. And so these are maybe Jewish skeptics from that day. Now, Peter's Jewish too, so, I mean, there's a debate among Christian Jews and non-Christian Jews, and they're saying, hey, you said Jesus is coming back. You guys make this claim, Jesus is coming back, and nothing's different really all the way back to Abraham. So they're skeptical. And so Simon Peter acknowledges that there's a group of skeptics who have taken the doctrine of the second coming of Jesus and the soonness of that claim, he's coming back soon, And they're now using it as an apologetic assault on Christianity by saying, you said he's going to come back soon. He hasn't come back. Things are the same since Abraham. You guys don't know what you're talking about. All right? Simon Peter answers this by saying the following. But do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day. The Lord is not slow about his promises, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but all to come to repentance. So Simon Peter's answer back to the skeptic of his day that this is taking too long, this is taking too long, is we have made the claim Jesus is coming back soon, and you guys say this is taking too long, we don't believe you. Simon Peter's argument is soon is from God's perspective. When we use the word soon, we're using it from God's perspective. And God, since he's eternal, is soon for him. Again, I use the perspective here. A 3-year-old whose birthday is coming soon feels very different than the parent and the 3-year-old's birthday that's coming soon. Yes, Chris.
I get a little confused that what he wrote. 1 day is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years like 1 day. I guess 1,000 years like 1 day because he's eternal. But why would he think 1 day is 1,000 years long?
I think this is hyperbolic language to just say our normal constraints of time are not God's. So he doesn't have the perspective of 1,000 years like we do, and he doesn't have a perspective of 1 day like we do. I think that's it's a hyperbolic statement. What's that? He doesn't own a watch. Are we sure he doesn't own a watch? Yeah, he probably doesn't own a watch. Yeah. Plus, if it were a watch, it would have to go up to 1,000 years, apparently. So, yeah. Yeah, he does. S-O-N, dial.
Could that an analogy of that possibly be when we talk about geology of the history of the earth, that, all of humanity is just a blip. It's just like the blip on the head of a pin.
Sure.
Relative to that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and in fact, I would put it in perspective not just on time, but also space. Because if you look at the size of the universe, you would say, to us, and I think from the creation narrative, human existence on the planet Earth is the pinnacle of the created order. But when you look out of the universe, you go, whoa, like this thing's massive. And you would say, from our perspective, Earth is significant and big. From divine perspective, again, back to we're a speck of dust, in this. And so we try to use perspective like at the Tower of Babel. They built the tower to reach the heavens. It's like, not really. And so they have that funny statement in there. God says, the Godhead, the conversation, let's go down and see this thing they've built. They have to go down and see it because it's so small. They have to actually go down to see it. It's so tiny. They think they built something into the heavens and it's so small, like, I can't even see this thing from up here. Let's go down and see it. Yeah, so you get this humor, almost this humor statement in there, and it's that same kind of perspective, like you're saying, is that when you take the size of Earth, the size of a human, the size of our, Dallas is this huge city, and you go, all right, yeah, it's tiny, right? I mean, it's tiny. And so I think that divine perspective, like you're saying, we look through the lens of it from our perspective, but from God's perspective, it feels and looks totally different. It reminds me of the funny, The New Yorker. Y'all know this magazine called The New Yorker? They had a cover of The New Yorker once that had New York City, huge, all these skyscrapers, and then the rest of America in the background, you could see like California and Texas in little bitty letters on it. And so Texas Monthly returned the favor. And their next cover had this massive Texas on it, and in the background you could see California and New York. They wrote in tiny letters, and so Texas Monthly responded back. And in some ways, it's kind of that perspective, right? It's like from our perspective, Texas is huge and New York is little. but if you take this to the extreme, God's perspective versus all of our perspective is we barely fit in the lettering on the cover of the New Yorker or Texas Monthly compared to God's divine perspective. And so, yeah, I think that's it. Now, some have taken this really literal then and said this ties back to the millennial reign of Christ, and then we have a literal 1,000. I do think that it may be coincidental. Some have also taken it for post-mill and said, see, the 1,000-year millennial statements in the book of Revelation, they're not literal 1,000 years. They're God's 1,000 years, which means some undetermined period of time. And have taken 2 Peter and projected it onto, we talked about this when we did the millennial reign of Christ, but that was a year ago, so you don't remember this. But we took these verses and put them on top of that. And some people have said, see, look, the millennial reign that's in the book of Revelation, it's not 1,000 literal years like, God doesn't have a watch or whatever. And they use this verse from Peter projected onto it to defend that the millennial reign is this nondescript, indefinite period of time that's just really, from a human perspective, long, vague and long. And premillennial are like, no, it's a literal 1,000 years. So I've followed some of these. I don't follow them. Sorry, that's not true. They show up on my Twitter feed, okay? My Twitter account is a baseball account, and I use it to post my baseball guys. So if some dude hits a home run in a game, I'm putting it on my Twitter, on the Twitter page, and I'm linking them to it because some of them will tell their college prospective coaches, hey, there's video, and so they'll use it to promote themselves, to try to get themselves signed, which I'm right there with them. I'm also calling coaches. I'm also telling coaches, hey, go look at this video. This kid just hit a bomb at DBU, and he's a high school kid, stuff like that. But for some reason, in my Twitter feed, there's, probably because I clicked on one, and then Twitter figures out you like stuff like this, and so then you see more of them. So anyway, so I'm in this, there's these feeds I see, and this one guy posted this week, the millennial reign is literal, and he said, if it's not, then the first coming of Jesus wouldn't have been literal on those prophecies. But look how literal those are. He's born in Bethlehem, and they make these cases like that. And to me, there was a bit of straw man type stuff going on there, though, because there's some stuff about the first coming of Jesus that he fulfilled, but are they're not like 1,000-year type language. That's a little different. You see what I'm saying? Like the language is a little different there. Like born in Bethlehem could happen over a period of time. A literal 1,000 years means someone started the stopwatch and is going to stop it at 1,000. So it does feel a little different. But anyway, so this verse is used to argue on the book of Revelation, millennial reign. On my end, I think this verse answers, because the context of this is not about the millennial reign. The context is people saying, where is this coming? You guys say he's coming soon. He hasn't come back soon. And these verses help with that, because Simon Peter's answer to that is this idiom. One day is like 1,000 years, like 1,000 years is a day. His answer back is this idiom that says, God's perspective is not our perspective. And so the difference between that and Revelation is that Revelation is not, is addressing a slightly different issue there. It's not trying to answer, hey, it's been a while, why hasn't he come back yet? It's dealing with different matters. So I think it's a little bit of an interesting thing to lay them on top of each other. It may work, but the bigger issue for me is Peter answers the question about Revelation 22, where people say, it says soon and quickly. What's up with that? And the answer from Peter would be, yeah, because God's perspective is this is soon and this is quick, right? So now the other thing I would say is then, okay, so let's go back to this. Oh, I skipped. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. So and he said, these words are faithful and true, and the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, sent his angel to show his bondservants the things which must soon take place. And behold, I'm coming quickly. Blessed is the one who keeps the words of the prophecy of the book. And then he actually says this again, behold, I'm coming quickly. He says it a couple more times, actually, before the end of the book of Revelation. Well, he says it, and then at one point, John says, even so, Lord, come quickly, or, that kind of thing. And so this emphasis that this is going to happen soon or quickly, and that dominates this last little bit of section here, that these things are going to take place in the near distant future. And that's led to people like R.C. Sproul and the Preterist Research Institute saying these things all did take place in 70 A.D. And so there's some post-mill among us, and I think that's the general. I don't think I'm misrepresenting this idea, so which is fine. Again, I'm not saying right or wrong on it. I've told you guys I'm a historical premillennialist typological preterist, and which is a term I think I made up. But yeah, I did make it up, didn't I? Yeah, you went and tried to find it, didn't you? I wasn't sure if I'd made it up because I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember where I got it from. I think I thought it up, but Richard's like, I said it, and Richard went looking to see if someone else is using it. I don't think anyone else is using this term. So I'm a historical premillennialist typological preterist. And what I mean by that is that 70 AD did mean something. It was a type of what will ultimately happen. And that at the end, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, something like it will happen at the end of time, only at the end of time, Jerusalem will be preserved, not destroyed at the end of time. The world will line up against her, but the city will be preserved this time, unlike what happened in 70 AD. And so I'm a typological preterist, meaning that the stuff of 70 AD matters and will be emblematic of what will take place later. And so, yeah. And there's also a huge argument here about R.T. France's interpretation of Matthew and all of that discourse and how that plays out. I've already been through all that stuff with you guys, but all right, comments or questions? Yes, Chris.
Does it seem like the human condition where you saying these folks are saying, oh, well, that didn't happen? Well, you're in sports, so sometimes you get a 10-run lead early on in the game and say, well, we're just killing them there. They
Right.
have no chance of coming back.
Yeah.
When indeed they do, and sometimes do come back and beat the other team.
Sure.
Is that very typical of human beings to always want to say it's over?
That may be, yeah. Baseball is a great example, too, because there's no clock in baseball. You have to get the 27th out, or in my case, the 21st out. So you never can run the clock out on anyone, right? Or you shouldn't be able to, outside of tournament play. Sorry, Richard. Welcome to the world of youth sports. You manage that totally different than you do a high school baseball game. But anyway, yeah, it's painful. Yeah. Kid tournament baseball has a clock, and if you don't manage it properly, you'll get burned badly. But anyway, at the high school level, though, and the professional level, they have to get the 27th out. And so you can say it's over, it feels like it's over, and then suddenly this team scores 12 runs and comes back and wins or something like that, and you go, oh, it wasn't over. Our perception of this was that it was over. Yeah, I think there may be some of that. I think also, I will tell you that some of this is driven around the following. People really want to have secret insight into things that no one else has seen. And end-time prophecy breeds that as much as anything. I run into this a lot with adamant teachings that are disconnected from orthodoxy, where it's like, oh, we figured it out, I mean, I realize scholars for 2,000 years have said the exact opposite, but they just didn't know what we knew. It's like, no, they know a ton more than you. What are you talking about? They all have PhDs. They study the original language. They've studied thousands of years of historical documents, and you've suddenly figured it out. It's like this happens a lot in eschatology, where individuals who are well-intentioned suddenly are drawing conclusions where you go, man, that's a leap right there. I don't think you know quite as much as you think you know. So we see this in the world of theology, And all of us have to be careful about it too, is that we get preset ideas. We got to go, okay, am I right about that? And we have to let the Bible dictate whether we're right about it too. Like if we're confronted with evidence contrary to what we think theologically, we've got to be able to adjust. And I've found too, the secret knowledge people who are like, well, our little group's figured this stuff out, and you Christians, you mainline Christians that represent, evangelical Christians that represent 99% of theological development and thought and, academics and study and that kind of thing. You guys just don't know. Like, if you've come up with something no one's ever thought of before, it's probably because you're wrong, that kind of thing. So, but we do have to be, typological preterism. Yeah, like someone thinking of something no one else has ever thought of, yeah. Hey, but for the record, I've told you guys over and over, I'm wide open on this eschatology stuff. And I hear post-mill say stuff, and I go, that's a pretty good case. I hear all-mill say something, I go, they make a pretty good case there. And I'll hear dispensationalists, which I'm not a dispensationalist, I'll hear dispensationalists say, man, that's some pretty good arguments there. So, yes, it's true, I invented this term, but I'm saying up front, be open to these kinds of things. However, I think on end times, one of the challenges is that our own desire for how these things will break drives some of our interpretation of this too. I've seen a lot of American-centric interpretation of the book of Revelation, and when I hear it, I always go, I think you want it to break that way. I think you want America to be in the book of Revelation. I think you want America to be part of this storyline, that kind of thing. Yeah.
How do you think that the danger or the prospect of nuclear holocaust ties in with the
Yeah, that's a good question. We have the threat of weapons of mass destruction, a variety of kinds, but the nuclear weapon in particular. I remember as a kid, there's a verse in Peter that says the elements will be destroyed with the roar of fire. I remember as a kid writing in my Bible, is this nuclear war? That kind of thing. And so I agree. I mean, that question's been on my mind since I was a kid. Like, how does this play out? And I know for those of us who probably practiced getting to the bomb shelter when we were little kids, some of you are not old enough to remember this, but some of you do, right? And because we were worried about the Ruskies bombing us randomly on a Tuesday. So, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Will calmer heads prevail the whole time so that no one ever pushes that nuclear option, and instead we only have conventional war? It's a possibility. Or do we have one of them goes off and the fallout's so devastating that everybody goes, okay, we're not doing that again? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know. It doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like conventional warfare is completely eliminated in the book of Revelation. If this is future, it does seem like conventional warfare, the gathering of troops in Megiddo, that kind of thing, that a nuclear weapon, if it was a nuclear weapon fight, we wouldn't be gathering in the valley of Megiddo, right? They would just, bomb the world. So I don't know. That's a good question. I've thought about that too. How does conventional weapon work out? How do weapons of mass destruction work out? How do nuclear weapons in particular play into these things? I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. Now we do have the ability to destroy more people more rapidly than ever before, and even outside of nuclear weapons, right? I mean, we have things that are well beyond what John could have ever comprehended in his day. Whole cities could be leveled in a second, and John is in a day where those kinds of things would have taken some effort, and now it's like one bad actor with the button, and things can go very south on it. Yeah.
But I don't mean to belabor it, but what I'm wondering is, how does that make the connection with the concept of end times from the Bible?
Yeah. Yeah, so the connection between like weapons of mass destruction, nuclear warfare, the ability to destroy tons of nations all at once, and then the end time type prophecy. I'm not sure. The answer is it could play a role at some level. I mean, some people have wondered, some people are writing America into the book of Revelation. Some people have written America out of the book of Revelation, and they've theorized that we get hit with an EMP or we get hit with a nuclear weapon, and we're so badly disabled that as this war at Megiddo and everything breaks out, that America is basically like peace, we're out. We're dealing with our own problems. So some people have speculated that way. I've heard both extremes. I've heard people write America right into the book of Revelation, and they're a huge player, and that the American church is the new Israel. And I've heard other people say America is completely absent from the book of Revelation, and it's led to speculation of something like you're saying. Do we get hit with a nuclear weapon? And we're so busy just dealing with that fallout and all the trouble with that we just go, you guys have at it. We're out on this war thing. We're just going to have to fix our own thing. I don't know. There's been discussion about that, yeah. Because the book of Revelation does seem more Eurocentric and more Asia Minor and Palestine, Israel type focus than America and Canada and even, Mexico or whatever, Central America, South Central America. So it does seem to be more focused that way. All right, so we have this statement, come quickly, these things must soon take place. I would make the argument that this soon and come quickly has a divine perspective to it, and that there's not a implied this will happen in John's lifetime or this will happen in a certain number of years or anything like that. But it is a divine perspective that in divine perspective it does take place quickly or it will happen soon, and that's the perspective that matters here. But I will say to you, it's become a point of theological discussion. And this verse is one of a few in the book of Revelation that's generated it's already happened. Yes, Chris. Okay, so in the book of Daniel, the 7 years is actually split in half in exact days given, and they're given to Daniel in ways that sound like they do have a stopwatch. This doesn't have that kind of time to it. Now, the 1,000-year millennial reign, I think some would argue, just like Daniel and the days and the 7 years and all that, that also has a clock to it as well, or a stopwatch going on it, or in that case, calendaring. The difference between those and this, there's no number, it's vague reference, I think is the distinction. This is vague, yeah. Come quickly, it will happen soon. Again, a 3-year-old whose birthday's coming soon. I've had, you ever have a 3-year-old tell you that they're 3.5? And then you're going, okay, we're already doing fractions. Why are we doing fractions? And then you ask the parent, and you're like, there are 9 months from the birthday. I was like, why are we at 3.5? This is 3 1/5. It's like, since we're doing fractions here. And the reason they're saying 3.5 is because they're in a hurry to get to 4, right? And the day after they're 4, they'll tell you they're 4.5, right? Yeah, almost 5, right? And then in the summer, if you ask a kid what grade they're in, they always tell you the next grade. Like if they just finished 2nd grade, they don't go, I'm in 2nd. They say, I'm in 3rd, right? Because when you're at that age, you're always on to the next thing. So it's a perspective thing here. And if you're a parent, what do you tell them? You say, 2nd. There's 2nd grade. And this is when the kid looks at the parent like, hey, don't short me here on this. I've finished that grade. What are you don't knock down my accomplishments, right? Or the parent says they're 3. The kid's like, 1.5, right? And so the perspective difference there, I think we have that a little bit with God going on here too. And so I think that leaves us in this category of the soon from a divine perspective. All right. Well, let's pray together. God, thank you for your grace, your mercy. I do pray, God, that our hope will be firmly and completely set on you and the second coming of Jesus, the resurrection of the saints, the ushering in of eternal life, all of those things, Lord, that our hope would be firmly set upon these truths. We pray all these things in the name of Christ. Amen. All right, you guys are awesome. See you next week.